Hello and welcome to Town Meeting Television and another in our live candidate debate forums. It's part of our continuing coverage of election 2020. I'm Matt Kelly. On this show, I'm pleased to be welcoming candidates for Vermont State Representative, Chittenden County District 6-5. And joining me on the debate screen are Tiff Bluemle, Tom Licata, and Gabrielle Stebbins. Candidates, welcome to you all, and thank you so much for your willingness to serve our great state. Our format for this evening is pretty simple. We'll begin with opening statements from you each, followed by a round-robin question and answer. A reminder to please keep your responses to 90 seconds or less. We tend not to interrupt unless it looks like you're going long. If you're watching this live stream on our YouTube channel, you're invited to dial in and ask questions of the candidates directly. The number to call in is 862-3966. Again, that's 862-3966. So let's begin. Tiff Bluemle, your opening statement, please.
That's what, and you have a name that starts with one of the first letters of the alphabet. You always get to go first. My name is Tiff Bluemle, as you said, and I have lived in Burlington for a little over 23 years, and it was a deliberate choice to come here. My sister had moved here. She decided to open a bookstore. I came up to help her with the nonfiction section, and I really grew to love this place. And I also, my partner and I had been living in New York City, and we'd been thinking about, where we wanted to raise children. And being a two-mom family, we thought that Vermont was a place where our boys could feel safe and be supported by adults in their community, and feel good about their family. So I've been here for that period. I've lived in the South End for about 19 years. I have worked as a history teacher. I worked at Outward Bound. I was at Vermont Works for Women for 17 years, and Changed the Story, which is an outgrowth of Vermont Works for Women, focused on culture change and systems change. I was a teacher for 10 years, and I loved my work with individuals. And when you work with people, over time, you start to discern patterns, and you start to see, as I did at Vermont Works for Women, the way in which systems don't actually support the people that they're intended to support. And then all of a sudden, poof, you become an advocate. And I spent a lot of my time as an advocate trying to advance changes for women in the correction system, or for people who wanted access to training and access to jobs that paid a livable wage. And I am running for office a bit to my surprise in April. Well, I guess it was in May that Joey's position, her intention to retire, it came up, and I saw, for the first time I ever have seen, an opportunity perhaps to take what I've learned in the field and apply it to shaping policy. And I think that the past 6 months have been really hard, but they also offer a real invitation. We are asking more fundamental questions than we ever have, since I've been watching the legislature. Who's essential to the economy, and what should they be paid? If we have learned that childcare, healthcare, and paid family leave are so important, then what does that compel us to do? Broadband, it's an equity issue. Very, very clear to everybody now. And, what is the appropriate role of police and prisons? As a teacher, my job, I felt, was to help young people ask good questions. And that's really how I view the role of a legislator. To try to engage people in robust conversation, field experts, people with lived experience, to identify and highlight strategies that are already underway. We don't have to reinvent the wheel or duplicate services, and to help forge necessary coalitions that are needed to advance change. I've done this before. One sentence? No?
Go ahead.
Anyway, I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I apologize. Just a reminder that 90 seconds, and if you're in the middle of a cogent thought, we'll allow you to continue.
Yeah.
But a gentle reminder to wrap up. Tom Licata, your opening statement for your viewing audience and your constituents, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Again, my name is Tom Licata, and I've been in Burlington and Vermont for roughly 25 years. We've been in the same house for 25 years and essentially in the same district. In terms of my involvement with the community, I was a baseball coach for several years. I ran the Burlington Cub Scouts for several years. I received the Burlington Leadership Award for what I believe is organizing the largest Block party ever in Burlington for about 6 consecutive years. That was a lot of fun. And so that's some of my involvement that I've had in the community. In terms of my career, I've had kind of dual careers that I would bring to the position of representative. For about 12 years, I was in the corporate world. I have an MBA, and I've had jobs with IBM and Virginia Electric and Power and McDonald Associates, and I did some corporate strategic planning and accounting. And so I have a finance and planning background that I would bring to the position of representative. In terms of my other career, right now I work as a caregiver, and I have some experience, not just in caregiving, but another experience with childcare as well. I worked with homeless children in New York City for a time. And so I have kind of a divergent set of skills that I would bring to the position as representative of this district. In terms of what I would like to focus in on, I would like to focus in on the economy. And Vermont's economy has been somewhat stagnant over literally decades now. For the last roughly 10 years, Vermont has lost more people than it's brought in. And for roughly the last 5 years, we have more deaths than births. So it's estimated that we're going to lose about 0.5% of our population in the 10-year census, as opposed to the country as a whole is picking up probably 6 or 7% growth. So there's something going on that Vermont that is not going in the right direction. I hope to change that. Thank you.
Very good. Gabrielle Stebbins, your opening statement, please.
Thanks. My name is Gabrielle Stebbins. I'm running for state rep because I have a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old, 2 girls. I also have, my 10-year-old goes to Champlain Elementary. I also have 2 folks, my parents, who are entering almost their 80s. And so a lot of us, particularly in the time of coronavirus, I am very much living the very real juggle of working full time while teaching my 10-year-old at home, probably poorly, and changing diapers when daycare can't open, and also really checking in with my folks in terms of the elder care and the affordable health care that many elder people may or may not have. So I'm running because, as Tiff said, coronavirus has actually really highlighted what's important. I think 2 years ago, I might not have been as interested because I would have been like, childcare is important. People would be like, and now you say childcare, and they're like, yes. And to Tom's point, I also really the economy is a reflection of our health as a community, and so I am running because I want a future for my children, and I want a good landing for my parents. In terms of experience, so I've been living here in Burlington for over a decade. In terms of experience, my experience runs the gamut. I've been a professional violinist. I've taught violin in urban underserved public schools. I started a community group to address in Dorchester, Massachusetts, air quality issues, as well as gang violence, and also racial inequity issues. I worked on human rights issues in South Africa. I've worked on water quality issues for Department of Fish and Game. The last 12 years, I've really focused, however, on energy issues, because as you can tell from my experience, I care about a lot of things, and they're all interconnected. But ultimately, the way we use energy is going to impact everything else in our life. Climate change is going to make affordability more challenging, racial discrepancies more challenging, being able to get food, everything. The impact of climate change is so big, but also too are the opportunities in terms of thinking in integrated systems ways, in terms of how to grow the economy, save energy, address the climate change, and grow Vermont.
Very good. Candidates, thank you for that opening statement. 3 candidates, 2 open seats. 2 of these candidates will be going to Montpelier. It's all dependent upon your vote. A reminder, if you do have a candidate question, you're welcome to dial in and ask directly at 862-3966. And now into our round robin Q&A. And Tom, we'll begin with you. How do you think the state has done overall in its response to COVID-19?
From what I understand, we've done quite well. Our deaths, I think we have just under 60 deaths, and the majority of them they've happened under what we know is the underlying people with underlying conditions and the elderly. And so we've contained it well, and we should be applauded for that. And I think going forward, we should probably stay on the correct track, because I assume that within roughly 3 to 6 months, we will have a vaccine. And everything I've heard that will be the case, and hopefully we could put this to bed. Thank you.
Gabrielle Stebbins will ask the same question of you. How do you think the state's response to COVID-19 has been, not just on a public health scenario, but perhaps on an economic level as well?
So when you say state, I'm assuming you mean our current administration and legislative leaders.
Exactly.
And that's great. But I would say that, in Michigan, there's a governor who has called for the same exact things. And yet the bodies and the people of Michigan have not necessarily chosen to follow. So I would tee up from Tom's response. Yes, good job to our administration, good job to our legislators, but also good job to the Vermont people for listening and caring, and for saying, you know what, I'm not going to make that trip 3 states over, because it's just not worth it. And, I struggle with this with my family members who live in Virginia. And, it's just, it's a sign of who Vermonters are in terms of our pragmatism, our long-term view, and our care for one another. In terms of the economy, I think the legislature was very, very smart about, adjourning and coming back and doing a 6-month and then another 6-month budget. We're always all hopeful that we are going to be able to receive some federal funding in terms of, whoever wins November 3rd, perhaps there's some stimulus funding. That being said, Vermont has 14% surplus on our revenues right now. It might be time. In fact, I think it's time. I would vouch that it's time to call on some of our rainy day funds. And that is separate from having a budget deficit. Calling on our rainy day funds is separate. And what we need to do is invest in our economy so that we start to have more people working. And from that, you'll start to have more income tax come in, and then we can pay off and pay back into those rainy day funds. This is why we have rainy day funds.
Nice. Tiff, Bluemle will ask the same question of you. What's your opinion on the response from the state through the administration, or whether it be through the legislature, to the challenges that COVID-19 has brought, either economically or on an overall basis?
Yeah, I I would agree with Tom. I think that the state has responded very responsibly as it relates to protecting the health of folks and trying to be as clear as possible. It has, and I also agree with Gabrielle. That has a lot to do also with our willingness to abide by the recommendations and regulations that have been part of our world for the last 6 months. I think that it has laid bare some real problems, systemic problems. First, the data we don't have, the way in which we didn't begin to track COVID cases by race. There were some gaps there. Our IT systems failed a lot of Vermonters at the Department of Unemployment, and people we have one constituent that was probably called, she said, 78 times to try to get through to resolve her issue. And broadband. What we saw were a lot of mutual aid societies that were cropping up, and that I think is we can do that more and connect those to communities that didn't have them. I also think that we are going to have to find ways to transition people from jobs that will be permanently lost, either because they're related to travel, hospitality, or service industries that were particularly hit, and to jobs where we really need people. And some of those are the green jobs that Gabrielle talks about.
Wonderful. A reminder, if you have a question for the candidates, 862-3966 is our number. Gabrielle, we'll begin with you on this next question then. So what are your main priorities as you hopefully head to the legislature for the first time in the upcoming session? And how do you think your constituents will benefit more by your attention to those issues?
So I did spend 5 years as an advocate in the State House. So one of the benefits is I will definitely hit the ground running. I've worked on 20, 30 bills that ultimately became law, all related to clean energy, either renewable energy or energy efficiency. In terms of, what I will hit the ground running with, it's odd to run in this time. You don't knock on doors, but you make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls. And generally, I feel like I have a good pulse of the constituency, but I would hope that people would reach out more and say, we want this, we don't want that. Why are you doing this? I don't agree with this. I agree with this, because ultimately my job is to weave a balancing act, to hear what the constituents want, as well as to lead forward and to empower Vermonters by representing them. What I've heard frequently, and from my 12 years working in energy, in clean energy, and chairing the Burlington Electric Commission as well for the last 6 years, what I've heard repeatedly and what I know to be true is that there are many, many more ways to identify win-win-wins if we think in an integrated systems approach. For example, right now we spend $1.5 billion a year on fossil fuels for heating and driving. We can take our, struggling higher eds, we can take our community colleges, we can train Vermonters in livable wage jobs. The start of livable wage jobs for like a solar installer or an electrician is anywhere from 13 to 15 bucks an hour. And it just goes up after you have more years experience. This saves Vermonters money. It makes their homes more valuable, more comfortable. It also makes a dent in our climate change. And it means we have so much more money to spend here locally. So there are like 5 or 6 bills that I'd be really interested in supporting or sponsoring or co-sponsoring, but I'm really looking for that triple win: economy, environment, and our community.
Tiff Bluemle, the same question to you. How do you expect your constituents to benefit through your candidacy and the particular issues that you are going to be focused on, and if you could share what those are?
Sure. I think the best ideas or the best solutions really are a product of a really good process, and it goes to the heart of what Gabrielle was talking about. I mean, as a legislator, I would serve the South End by regularly convening conversations, as I said in my intro, by inviting different voices to those conversations, particularly those with lived experience, by seeking out and highlighting the innovative work that others are doing that really ought to inform policy, but that aren't necessarily known to policymakers, and by trying to understand the ways in which many of these issues intersect, because you can tweak one thing on one end, but have unfortunate consequences on the other end, and you've got a mess. So how would that impact my neighbors or the state, that approach? Well, I would like to think that we'd have a more engaged electorate. I think that this particular district is very engaged, but I'd like to see even greater diversity in that engagement. Would waste less energy in reinventing things that actually already exist because we work hard to try to identify those things. I think we would be able to hear from more Vermonters. We've now learned we can Zoom. We can, so people don't have to leave their jobs in the middle of the day to go testify, and we can meet at night to make it possible for working Vermonters to be part of the process. And I would hope that people would see that decision making, the silos that often define decision making, were broken down.
Very good. Tom Licata, same question to you. If you could share with us some of the issues that you're passionate about and that you think will make an impact through your direct participation in the process. If you could share your priorities and how you think you'll make a difference.
Oh, sure. So again, to reiterate, I would bring my economic, finance, and accounting background to the legislature, so I have that to offer. Two of the things I could think of that I would like to focus on is one is decentralization and one is accountability. Regarding decentralization, I would like the state to maybe relinquish some of its kind of imprint on local communities and give some of that power to counties and to towns. And so I would bring down the power of the state and give it to the counties and the towns to make more local decisions. So I would be favorable toward decentralizing our government. And in terms of accountability, as an example, to what I mean by that is I would look to the Global Warming Solutions Act, where the legislature kind of dropped the act of legislating to an unelected 23-member board to make decisions that really the legislature should be making and should be accountable for. And they were asked to vote on whatever recommendations were made by this 23-member board, and they decided not to. So to sum up, I would try to decentralize the state, and I would try to make the legislature hold up their end of the bargain and be accountable to the people.
Very good, candidates. Thank you so much for your responses. And a reminder to our viewing audience, if you're watching this live, you may dial in and ask a question at any time at 862-3966. Tiff Bluemle, we'll go to you now with our next question. It has to do with the budget. We are expecting some significant shortfalls due to the effects of the coronavirus. How would you approach the budget going forward if you were elected to this position? Some hard choices for sure.
Yeah, well, and we don't really know what we're going to be facing. And I mean, this is a really exceptional moment. It's a very strange animal. This recession isn't like other recessions. I think I am optimistic about renewed stimulus funding. I don't know when we would get that, but folks I've talked to think maybe January, February. And that will help. That is what has enabled us to balance our budget this year and next year. But it's not realistic for us to think that we can just muscle through this without federal assistance. So I think that stimulus money from the federal government is critical, as it is critical to real healthcare reform. In an economic crisis, austerity has historically proven not to be an effective solution. You lose small businesses, there's less spending in the economy in general, there's long-term employment skills erode, and we then have whole families that experience, and children who grow up in poverty. And I believe that first, some of the reforms that I am behind or support: reducing our reliance on prisons, shifting mental health emergencies from police departments to mental health professionals, and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, as Gabrielle said. and finally investing in childcare have the potential for long-term savings. We have to think long-term, and we think in 2-year bites, and as budget concerns, 1-year bites. More immediately, I think we do have to consider raising taxes on the top 20% of Vermonters who got a $350 million a year tax cut from the federal government. I think we have to consider that. I will not be somebody who denies that they will raise taxes.
Thank you. Just a reminder, 90 seconds. We try not to interrupt, particularly if you're in the middle of a cogent thought. Tom Licata, some budget challenges facing the legislature for sure due to the effects of COVID-19. And that's going to mean some difficult choices for whoever goes to Montpelier. Can you speak about that and how your candidacy or your role as a legislator would benefit your constituents?
Oh, sure. So a large part of our budget is education, and that is in large part funneled through our property tax system. And property taxes have gone up consistently for not just years, but decades. And oftentimes, if not almost always, they have grown more than household incomes have grown. And so our tax bite is taking more and more of our families' incomes out of our pockets, and that's very difficult for families to sustain their ability to live. And so what I would do in terms of the budget is I would like to relook at how we fund our schools and education spending. We've lost literally tens of thousands of students over the last 2 to 3 decades, but education costs continue to far outpace inflation. And in tandem with that, I would like to try to better link school spending with taxes. The way we fund schools now, there's not a very clear distinction or link between spending and taxes. And I'd like to try to solidify that more, so when people actually vote to whether they want to raise taxes or not, they know that when they raise taxes, their taxes will go up as well. And so the link, so that people essentially are more vested into the system. So I would try to look at that.
Very good, Tom. Thank you. Gabrielle Stebbins, the same question. Major budget challenges facing the legislature, and we operate on a no deficit type of structure, a balanced budget, if you will. Is that the best, course of action going forward? What do you think about the budget and how you would address it if you were elected to this position?
So I'll start with I think every Vermonter at some point has been barely keeping up with their bills. And that is not the time that you try to invest in big new projects. I also think that many people, not everybody, but it'd be nice if it was more people. For myself, when I was 38 and for 40 or I don't know, my first job, not in the nonprofit world and not in local or state government, my first for-profit job, I was finally able to start setting aside savings. And so I bring back the point that we do have like 14% of our reserves that we, in comparison to our expenditures. And this is when you dip into those. This recession, to what Tiff was saying, is not a result of fiscal imprudency or poor choices. This is a result of a pandemic. And it's an opportunity to reset and to say, okay, what do we really care about? Where are Vermont's strengths? Are we going to focus on a clean energy economy that we know is growing? Are we going to focus on rebuilding our communities? Are we going to focus on, technology and sustainable agriculture? How do we rebuild our farms so that they're not just healthy economically, but also environmentally related to, water quality issues? So I would really like to step back and take a look at all the different tools in our toolboxes. We have this reserve. We also have a fantastic credit rating, which is, a conversation with our treasurer. But we also have, after World War II, there was a, Vermont Victory Bond that raised billions of dollars. We can do this through creativity. And finally, I'll just add, I've worked on a number of clean energy finance projects where you pay for the savings that you get and you reinvest them at the front of the project. So you're paying the same amount every month, but at the end of the 10 years, you're home free. And we need to really figure out, there's plenty of capital in the world. We need to figure out, and in Vermont, we need to figure out how to make that available to Vermonters.
Very good. Thank you, candidates. A reminder, 90 seconds, please, for a response, and try to keep it in that time frame. Tom, we'll begin with you on our next question here, and it is with education in mind. You had mentioned that in your previous response. We're seeing quite a fundamental paradigm shift in the way education is delivered to our students as a result of COVID-19. And I'm just curious if you could share your thoughts about going forward. Is this remote learning the new paradigm? Does that impact the amount that we should pay in our school tax?
Oh, it could be. Answer would be yes and no to that. For older students, certainly, starting with college, our state colleges, remote learning could help reduce costs that way. Even then, when you start to get down into the high school level, maybe certain courses could also be taught remotely, and we could find efficiencies there. But I think as you get down to the elementary age school, I'm a little more weary of that, not only because kids that age have to be taken care of, but also I think they need that presence of an adult with them. So briefly, we could use it for some of the older children and the young adults in college, but I would be reluctant to try to go that route with the younger kids.
Gabrielle Stebbins, the same question to you. COVID-19 has fundamentally changed, at least in the short time, the learning paradigm for our city's youth. Do you see this as the new normal going forward, or is it a return to the way things used to be? And how do you expect the amount that we pay in our property tax to accurately reflect this new paradigm?
So I have spoken with constituents about the property tax, and I spoke with one gentleman, I think he was 84, and he's like, Gabrielle, I bought this property when I was 20. I haven't worked. The taxes just keep going up, and it's a great property, but it's not sustainable. And so I hear that from our constituents. I also know that children are our future. They're our future doctors, our future lawyers, our future judges, our future, baggers at City Market. I would agree with Tom that it's a yes and no. Personally, the only class that I did poorly in was a remote class. It was all remote, and I did very poorly. I was like, you want me to write a 15-page paper on some software? I didn't connect. My husband, on the other hand, really learns well via remote. And I would agree also, the younger children, it's not just about books. It's about responsibility. It's about how you communicate, how you work with other people. It's about the other social dynamic skills you learn in school. I do not think it's the way of the future. I think it's a part of the future, particularly because not just in Vermont, everywhere we're seeing higher ed struggle. We're seeing many, many colleges, private colleges close, and public colleges considerate. So I think it's part of it. I don't think it's all of it, and I don't think it's for everyone. And I think we're going to have to be careful if we assume that sitting in front of, even right now, right here, as the four of us talk, this is not the same dynamic. Right. Humans are human.
Right. Gabrielle, thank you. Tiff Bluemle will ask you the same question. Education funding is certainly going to be a hot topic in Montpelier with reduced revenues due to COVID-19. And we're seeing a fundamental shift, at least again in the short term, in the way education is delivered to our youth. Do you see this as the new normal going forward? And how do you plan through your candidacy or your role to change the education funding formula and hopefully improve it?
Mute.
Tiff Bluemle.
Sorry. Yeah, hi, sorry, I was muted. So I do not believe it is more efficient to teach remotely. My partner runs a school, and she has had to hire more people. It is. I think that in time there may be a role for kind of the upside down curriculum where kids kind of download content, but then they have to come to school and they have to use it and they work with it. And that's, as a former teacher, I know that that's where the learning takes place. And I think that most educators would say that their students, and certainly my son who's in high school, is very underwhelmed by his experience in high school right now. The issue of funding, I've had a number of conversations, and wow, I think that the funding formula and mechanism is really complicated. And someone ventured to say, this is a legislator ventured to say, I don't think anybody in that building actually really understands how it works. I'm sure that's not totally true, but something's not working with the funding system, as I think all of us have pointed out. And I think that there are interesting proposals to kind of decouple the education funding from the property tax to the income tax. I think we got to get creative about the funding issue.
Okay, Gabrielle, we'll continue here with you, if you don't mind, and offer you the next question. And it has to do more with the nonprofits in our state. And you yourself ran a nonprofit. So this is probably something quite personal to you, and I would suspect to all three candidates, as all three have been in that space as well. Given the challenges that the state revenues are presenting, and yet the incredible work that these nonprofits do, much of it often in place of the state, no less important, but the nonprofit takes on the role rather than the state government. Can you share how your candidacy will particularly help nonprofits in this challenging time?
Well, I think nonprofits are one of the multiple legs of the stool. We have state and local government, and we have entrepreneurs that we must work with and tap into. But as we've seen in terms of some of the policing issues, mental health issues, the fact that we've applied incarceration to address systemic issues within our community that frequently are only addressed by nonprofits, be they public health nonprofits or nonprofits that help homeowners purchase a home or retrofit a home so they can afford it more, or educate their children or gain a better opportunity for investing in their own business. It's a critical tool within the multiple different players, in particular because nonprofits don't have a profit-driven, core to them. Their core is the mission. So in terms of how do we balance the budget that's available for different nonprofits, Vermont does have a lot of nonprofits, having worked for one, and I even started another one. A renewable energy education fund to try and explain what our clean energy challenges were. And there is a challenge there in terms of having too many nonprofits, but there's also a real challenge in terms of not serving the people either through government or through for-profit entities. So figuring out that balance, ultimately, I think this is where Tiff and I are pretty similar, pulling the stakeholders together, identifying what the challenges are, what the needs are, and how do we best meet them, and what are the best performers in terms of, the entrepreneurial strengths, state and local government, and nonprofit.
Tiff Bluemle, Gabrielle mentioned you in her statement there, and again, you probably have a very you have a great vision for nonprofits and their role here in the state. They really do serve a role where the state oftentimes is unable to meet, and so.
Mhm.
Given these, challenging times, how do you view your candidacy as a way to really ensure that the great work that these nonprofits do continues?
Well, yeah, I ran a nonprofit for 17 years, grew the budget from 350K to just under $2 million. At the same time, over that period, public funding went from 80% to 10%. And that's because I was really good at fundraising because things kept getting pulled and the landscape kept changing. And most of the nonprofits that have contracts with state government are underpaid, some of them by maybe 50%. And that has a lot to do with federal reimbursements, which is not something that we have a lot of control over. But the value of community-based organizations is exactly as you said. They often know their clients and the communities and the context in which they live their lives and are best able to address their needs. And the state doesn't really work collaboratively with nonprofit organizations. So they will make decisions really absent of input from the various service providers who are doing this work. And then they are, and then we lose the capacity that we have built because, a service provider loses a contract. And then 3 years later, they put out an RFP for the same kind of thing. And so we need to coordinate and build a tighter connection between state agencies and nonprofits.
Tom, we'll leave the final response for you before our closing comments here. Again, you have a unique perspective on the nonprofit world due to your work. How do you view your candidacy as a way to support the great work that these nonprofits do and to continue to ensure that they continue to do it?
Oh, sure. So in economics, there are two base ways to grow an economy. One is population growth, and the other is productivity. Very briefly, you have more people, and you could make more things and provide more service. Or if you have the same level of people, if you do things better, you could produce more with less resources. And so again, what I would do in the legislature is I would try to address our population decline. You get more people, and then you have more tax revenue state, and then also the state can then help those nonprofits. And I would try to use the ramifications of COVID. We've learned some things, and one of those things is how to use technology better, and I think that would help as well.
Very good. My thanks to our candidates for joining us here on this here debate. The time goes so fast, so it is time now for our closing comments from each of our candidates. And we are running short on time, so we'll ask for 30 seconds from each candidate for a closing comment. And Gabrielle Stebbins, we'll begin with you.
Great. Thanks so much for holding this. The first time I reached out to an elected official, I was in third grade. I wrote about my concerns about land use and development. And the next year I wrote about my fear about nuclear war. Good laws can make a good difference in people's lives. And I know this to be true, having worked in the State House for 5 years. If elected, I will certainly listen to you. I will reach out and I will do my best to find win-win-win integrated solutions, because ultimately we're in this together.
Tiff Bluemle, your closing comment, please.
Sure. Well, at the beginning, I talked about my family and moving here very deliberately because of what Vermont had championed for the LGBTQ community, and we've been embraced, and that is, and I'm really grateful for that. There are a lot of people, however, who have not been welcomed as warmly, or who enjoy the kind of support that that we enjoyed, and so we've got to do better, and that's really why I'm running for office.
Very good. Tom Licata, your closing comments, please.
Well, sure. Thank you for having us. Again, I believe that in Vermont, we need to focus in on the economy and affordability, and in large part, that has to do with our property taxes. They're not sustainable, and we have to address the economics as well as the population decline in Vermont.
My thanks to our candidates for joining us here this evening. They've done the hard part. They've put their name forth. Now it's up to you to cast your vote. Two of these candidates will head to the State House in Montpelier. Tiff Bluemle, Tom Licata, or Gabrielle Stebbins. It all depends on your vote. Reminder that early voting has already begun here in our great state. Check your mailbox for your ballot, complete the ballot, and return the ballot before the deadline. Or you can always show up at the polls in person and cast your vote directly on Tuesday, November 3rd. And then join us for complete election night details beginning at 7 p.m. right here on Town Meeting Television. For all of us at TMT, I'm Matt Kelly. Thank you for watching.